Well,
Spencer.
Oh, yes.
Thanks, Cody.
it's good for everybody. Thank you very much. You're welcome.
It's fun to the road.
All right, get the show on the road.
I was gonna say, you have to share your office now?
Kurt,
Yeah. But I already said-
please have a seat.
Who needs business?
Thank you for coming out. We're very excited to have Spencer and Cody here to talk about what you should and shouldn't do. Just an upcoming library event Thursday night. We're having 90s music bingo over at Mountain Merman. It's going to be a lot of fun, a lot of sing-alongs. So come on out, 6 o'clock. And with that, I'm going to hand it over. Very short announcements this time. Thank you for coming, and here we go.
Yeah. Appreciate it. Appreciate the Levita Library for hosting us here. So yeah, I'm Spencer Gerk. I'm the District Wildlife Manager for Colorado Purcell Wildlife for Walsenburg and Levita. My drug alone, my partner, Cody Purcell.
That's me. I'm out of Colorado City at Rye. Been there about 4 years. I did 8 years on the west slope out of Cedar Edge. And there's a lot of similar situations between Cedar Edge, Rye, and Levita with living with wildlife and specifically certain species that we'll talk about. So hopefully we can be of some help and provide some good info to you.
Yeah, so kind of we'll briefly cover just some general topics: mountain lions, black bears, bobcats, and deer. Typically here, mostly just mule deer, and then we'll just kind of open it up and it's be real informal. If you have a specific question or concern you want to ask about or have information about. So yeah, we've got some different pelts here from bears and mountain lions. So we'll just kind of jump in with black bears to begin with, which oddly enough, not all black bears are black. So yeah, like this guy right here, not even close. I think they say generally about a fifth, about 20% of our black bears are actually like truly dark black jet in color. So we used to have grizzlies in Colorado, but I think the last sighting that had any kind of confirmation was back in the 70s.
Yeah.
So for all intents and purposes, especially for this area, the only bears we have are black bears. Given most of our black bears aren't actually black. A lot of them are kind of this blonde or cinnamon color, or they'll have kind of streaks on them and stuff like that. But all of them are black bears. And they range in size from 150 to I think the biggest I've ever seen in southern Colorado was a little over 500. 500 pounds is a really large. I'd say most of them are in that 150 to 300 pound range.
Sightings around here?
Yeah, so there's always Walsenburg and Levita and Cacharas. I tell people there are and have been black bears and mountain lions in town and will be. Water's a limiting factor in Worthington County. We have water coming through the town of Levita. So there's, I would say, probably every evening at some point there's at least a bear wandering around Levita or on the fringes of Levita. A lot of times they'll use the river as almost like a natural highway. Where we get into the conflict and kind of some of the reason that we were here today is we get a lot of calls, hey, what should I or shouldn't I do, or is it safe or not safe? Black bears, they don't really like people and they really don't like dogs, but they're looking for a lot of calories, and here towards the end of the year they're looking for 20,000 calories a day. So I tell people they're going to take the path of least resistance, and if the path of least resistance is a natural food source, great, they're going to go that route. And sometimes it's not a natural food source, and that's where we would get into our human-wildlife conflict. So the goal there is to increase the resistance. If they have to work for it, if they have to spend a lot of time, a lot of energy, unless they can get in and get that positive connotation and get that reward, they're just not going to. It's not worthwhile. So a lot of the simple things I see is, hey, if you've got a metal bear-resistant trash can from Mountain Disposal or one of the other providers, make sure we're closing the lids, rolling the bar forward and locking it. If we've got a plastic trash can that's, a small roll-off one, if you have the ability, you've got a garage or a shed that you can fully close and lock, that's great. And then putting it out the morning of trash service. Worst case scenario, you have a plastic trash can that you don't have a garage or no means to secure it. In those instances, what I tell people is you can get even just a bungee strap or a ratchet strap to keep the lid down. It helps with the wind here in Warfena too, because
Is there wind here?
yeah, we try not to say the W word. It's kind of profanity in Warfena County, but it does get windy down here, so it helps with that too. And then ammonia. So like the cleaning aisle at the grocery store, a 88-cent, $2 jug of ammonia, you can soak some rags and put it in. And that'll keep them from getting into trash. Is there anything I'm missing? Any other trash?
No,
tips?
I don't think so. I think that's pretty good on the trash end of it. But they really do, like they think with their stomach. And that's how bears operate. So if there's a food source, they're probably gonna come into it if it's available. I like to think of it as in the beginning of the spring into the summer, yeah, they'll eat grasses and different vegetation, but there comes a point where there's a lack of nutritional value from those food sources. And at that point, they're in this gap where they're trying to find other food until those other natural sources come in, like acorns, choke cherries, berries, whatever it is. And depending on our year, if we have like an early freeze or a late freeze, whatever it may be, and it impacts that vegetation, they're going to be looking for other things. So at that crucial time, I always say it's like mid-July till about now is when they're struggling to find natural food. And that's when they start getting into town and getting into actual human attractants. And it's like they're between meals and they want a snack. That's what they're going to do. And right now, like I said, we're on that tail end of it. So our bear activity is slowing down in terms of conflict calls. But some years we've seen it where the acorns don't come in or it's a bad year, and that'll extend into October. It just depends on the year. Yes?
So, you say conflict calls. How many sightings have you seen so far this year, and how does it relate to previous years?
So I'm basing this on my experience in Rye, in Colorado City, but I would say this year is a little above average. I'd say not severe, but a little above average. Last year was very quiet. And then 2023, I consider that to be a high conflict, low forage year, and we were running bear call to bear call all day, every day. It was wild.
There have been bear sightings on the west side.
Yeah, I've had a couple up in Kachara, a few here, a few in Walsenburg. I'd definitely say it's a little more mellow compared to normal. But yeah, and some of them are someone simply saying, hey, I saw a black bear, they didn't, I'm not concerned about anything, I just, wanted to let you know. And other times, they're getting into stuff. So like, a lot of the calls typically for Walsenburg, Levita, Kachara's, Gardner, like the surrounding areas, typically the number one I would say is trash. And usually it's unsecured trash or people putting out trash, they'll roll it out the night before trash pickup. And really you want to put it out the morning of. Even if, if you're leaving at work at 5 in the morning, putting it out at 5 in the morning is a big difference between 9 or 10 o'clock at night. And then probably outside of trash, then a lot of bird feeders. Hummingbird feeders, usually sugar water, they'll take them and they'll drink them kind of like a can of Pepsi. And on bird feeders, what I usually tell people is if you've seen a bear in the area or you've had a bear sighting, put your bird feeders away, secure them for a week, put them out in the morning, take them down in the evening, and then if you have like grain bird feeders, make sure you're cleaning up around, because thinking like their stomach, that's easy, I can grab and boom, there's hundreds of calories versus, sitting at like a scrub oak or something like that. And then I think probably the next one after that would be like, I would call them hobby farms or personal use, like chickens, goats, stuff like that. Anywhere in Huerfano County, if you have chickens and you don't have hot wire electric, it's not a matter of if the bear will get into the chickens, it's a matter of when.
Or foxes.
And foxes too. Pretty much everything likes to eat chickens,
Skunks,
raccoons, skunks, foxes, like bears.
Chickens.
Oh
They
yeah,
will.
yeah.
A lot of
So-
times they're coming in for the feed though,
Yeah.
more than
Oh,
anything.
okay.
So I've had it where they'll come into a chicken coop or enclosure and they don't touch the chickens, they just eat all the feed and then ruin the enclosure as well. So once again, I say they're somewhat lazy in nature where they're like, I'd rather just do this than have to chase the chicken down.
Chickens.
But once the feed's gone or secured, then they may go for the chicken.
Yeah, and
Hit or miss.
the feed is kind of like dog food, stored in a secure location and definitely in a hard-sided container, either like from Big R, one of the white feed tubs that has the snap lids, or even just an old metal garbage can or like a plastic one, just something to where it's got a lid and it's not out in the open. I mean, in an ideal, perfect situation, a black bear can smell potentially 5 miles away.
Yeah, roughly 5
So,
miles. So
They know
where the food's at.
Yeah, and like salt blocks or anything like that for horses, stuff like that, just securing feed.
Bringing like dog food, cat food in at night is
Yeah.
very much recommended. So I say
Mountain lions, see any?
Yeah, so occasionally, and they kind of play into the domestic and feral cats. In my experience, if you have, mountain lions will pass through town and they'll use the Cacharras River here and in Walsenburg, and typically people will see them on a doorbell camera or a security camera at like 3 or 4 in the morning. All they're doing is they're just cutting through. But they do like to eat feral house cats.
that's one of our main diet staples in rural communities.
Yeah, so if you get one and you're thinking to yourself, why was it on my carport or why was it on a deck or something like that? Generally, if you have security footage, what we'll watch is mountain lion comes in, it's looking around, and then next thing you know, the feral house cat goes running away, and the mountain lion kind of, so on that front, I always tell people if you do have domestic house cats in the wee hours in the morning, if you let them out, turn a porch light on and stand there, or even in the doorway, or just turning the porch light on, because, that's their main draw for them in town. I've never seen a mountain lion in town take a deer or, typically they're just passing through or house cats.
Are deer, one of their preferred?
Yeah,
That's probably their
Yeah.
main natural
Because when
diet.
I walk along up the lakes where
Yeah.
there have been bear sightings near where you guys live, I'm not too worried about the mountain lions because I figure I don't taste as good as a fawn.
yeah, and
Why
they're
would they bother with me?
They're really opportunistic. They'll cover a huge area. They can roam a 200 or more mile range. And typically, like, we had one when I worked over at Lathrop State Park that was on the park, and I knew the general area where she was, and I specifically went out of my way to try to see her. It was like 2 years before I ever actually, caught a glimpse of her. And she came up and got a goose off the backside of the dam and the way she went. So they're really elusive. They're like black bears. They don't like dogs. They don't like people. They really don't like changes in their environment, so changes in lighting or anything like that. But they will pass through, and waterways are a natural movement corridor. As far as any risk of encounter, I would probably say sunset, sunrise, and typically that's with small domestic pets. And usually what we see is people just let them out, and they let, the house cat or, a very small dog out. They're not nearby, and it's, extended period of time, 20, 30 an hour. And then sometimes that's where we can get into conflict there. If you, turn the lights on, slide the door open, and, stand there, I've never had an issue or seen one hang by.
So how risky would it be for somebody like me to be walking at the lake in the morning with
I-
mountain lions?
I would say unbelievably low. Typically, if you saw in the news, there's been a couple instances out of California that come to mind.
Yeah,
Those were like a starving juvenile, and in all those instances, no one was seriously hurt that I know of. And then the other thing they'll do, whether it's a black bear or a mountain lion, is they'll do a lot of, hey, I'm big and scary. So there's a few videos online where, you know, a hiker or jogger's going down a trail and they come across a mountain lion. Typically, they have young ones, and they'll do where they kind of spread their paws and they're running down the trail, or like a bear, they'll do a bluff charge and they'll pop their jaw. Essentially what they're saying is, hey, don't mess with me, I'm really big and scary, I'm scary, don't mess with me. They don't want to interact with you, they just want you away from them. Yeah.
How long do young mountain lions stay near their mothers?
Say year.
It could be over a year.
Yeah.
So oftentimes we'll get pictures of lions and people are panicked because they think they've suddenly decided to travel in packs and a pride of mountain lions. But usually it's going to be a mom with her two sub-adults. So, it could be up to 2 years, but that's usually what we see. And I'd say probably a year and a half in is where they really start to break up and define their own home range. But I've seen that more frequently now, especially with more people having game cameras, ring cameras and everything. You'll see more in a group, but it's almost always going to be that mom with her two sub-adults.
Yeah, and I always tell people, if you ever have concerns about black bears or mountain lions, the best thing is changes in your environment around your house, leaving porch lights on, or turning the light on when you're letting your dog or cat out, or on bears, if they got into the trash, securing the trash, putting some ammonia out. If you see them hitting a car alarm, making a bunch of noise, and if you want to take it a step further, like, is there anything that I could carry with me? The bear mace or the bear spray, they make it anything from a little keychain to the big can. And you have to be really cognizant of the wind because you don't want to get that stuff on you. But you don't have to per se spray the animal. You just stick your arm out in the general direction they are, and they have a heightened sense of smell, and they will not want to have anything to do with you.
How do air horns, or, because I walk with a air horn typically, or some type of more for human intruders or human.
Yeah, air horns are great. So I tell people, if you see a bear, let's say it's kind of going towards the trash can or something, car alarm, because it makes a bunch of noise, air horn. I tell people yell, or even the radio, you can turn music on, a bunch of noise. They don't like changes in noise.
So I usually will just walk with because they make small air horns. I'll just have one of those.
Yeah. And both mountain lions and black bears, it's really simple. If you come across one, pretty rare because typically they're going to know you're there first, but if you do come across one and startle one, I always tell people just face them, slowly walk back away, make as much noise as you can. The one thing we tell people, don't turn around and run.
Especially the mountain lions.
Yeah.
There's a big cat, so they think it's a game. So
Yeah.
they'll probably chase you out of principle. So
And
don't
win.
run.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't run.
And dogs, if you're walking, keep them on a leash. So
Well,
yeah.
actually, I mostly carry that stuff for dogs.
Makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
The
Yeah,
dogs are also kind of a problem.
yeah, pepper spray or bear mace works really well on aggressive dogs
It
that are
does.
biting you. I have experience with that.
Yeah.
The only other thing I would add is if you encounter one on a trail, sometimes they may be more aggressive because they're sharing that trail with you. So at that point, I always advise to get off the trail and let them have that path because that's clearly where they're going. And a lot of times they use the same way in and out, so that's what they're gonna do. So if you get off the trail, you're probably more likely to get away from the animal or just have them pass without conflict. So something to keep in mind.
Yeah, path of least resistance. They're lazy. They're looking to expend the least amount of calories in reward for the highest amount. So as soon as you start putting up barriers, either securing your trash or changing the environment or making noise, all of those things, they don't want anything to do with you.
Yep. I remember, this has been a long time ago, this was before I was a temporary, and it was in Kachara, and this guy had his windows open, you know, it had screen on it, and I think he had just cooked dinner, and the bear could smell that. So the bear ended up in his house, and he didn't really know what to do, so he shut the window. And at that point, the bear really had no exit. So he was in the house with the bear, and the bear couldn't figure out how to get out. And so I tell people that, you know, if it comes in through a window, it's gonna leave through that window. And just make sure that path is clear.
Yeah.
Helps a lot so they can get out.
Yeah, and it's really rare that they do, but it's not to say it couldn't. So, you know, like, you know, run your barbecue grill for a couple minutes, burn off the food residue. You know, if you've got a cabin, like, you know, in a remote area, you know, clean it out all the way. Spices, flour, you know, cooking supplies, everything goes. And yeah, and if it's quiet and they think nobody's around and there's no interaction and stuff like that and they feel comfortable, so it's all about, you know, creating more work to where it's not worth it for them and creating an unwelcoming and uncomfortable environment, because it really does keep them alive. So I always tell people, enjoy them for a minute. If you see a bear, mountain lion, snap a photo and then make a bunch of noise. And if your neighbors call you because they think you've gone off the deep end, you know, you're off your
I'll
rocker.
send them to you.
I tell people you're doing it right. If your neighbor's calling going, something's wrong with my neighbor, he's lost it, he's yelling and screaming, all the lights are on, the car alarm's going, like, you know, the more the merrier, because then they get that reaction to where they see people and their reaction is they take off. Yeah, and then I think that's kind of.
Yeah, I mean, I always like to touch base too on, I guess, what are our expectations if you call us with a bear situation? I think the expectation a lot of times is that we're going to trap a bear and move it. And the reality of the situation is that we really do try our best to avoid that. And the reason that we do not want to trap and move bears, there's a couple things. So per our agency, we have a 2-strike policy. So if we go hands-on with a bear, we have to put ear tags in both ears, and that way we know we've handled the bear. And then if we have to interact with that bear again in a conflict situation, we have to put it down. So we really don't want to be doing that. I say we love the wildlife just the same. I say bears are amazing, they're extremely smart, I have a lot of respect for them. So we try to avoid that situation. So we're going to exhaust all of our options to make that bear not want to come back and do that. Now there are times when we have to euthanize a bear given what has happened. So that's generally when a bear is getting inside someone's home. We really don't have a say in that. At that point, that bear has to go. But usually we'll get a call and they'll say, hey, I've had this bear around my property for 2 nights in a row. Will you come move it? And then the other issue is I don't have anywhere to take them. So you have to realize that if we move a bear, we have to find a place where it's not going to be around people or livestock, because then we're just moving one conflict to another spot. So we're really limited on really having places to put them, and we don't want to do it in the first place. So our best attempt is to educate the bear that, hey, people are not fun to be around, this is not a good food source, you need to move on and go back to doing bear things. So, but that's always something I like to address, just because I generally field calls like, hey, this bear's here, will you trap it and move it? And really, that's kind of a last resort, and it has to escalate to a certain point where that's even an option for us.
Yeah, and kind of some of the factors that go into that is you have the potential to capture a non-target bear. So we could capture an animal that's just passing through, or we attracted an animal, you know, into the area, and we capture a non-target animal that's not in conflict, and you put a strike against that animal. Another place Cody brought up is it's getting harder and harder to find places to release a bear where we're not releasing them from your backyard into someone else's backyard. And then also, especially in town, I never want to have a situation where a person or a child gets hurt or, you know, around a trap, because you know, we don't want to put it somewhere where, you know, either dogs or, you know, somebody's kids or grandkids are going to be, you know, what's this, and be around it. So we want to avoid that for safety too.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, trying to avoid that. And we have resources like, it's hard in town Out of town, we'll give people bean bags for a 12 gauge shotgun. They're less lethal, so you can shoot them at the bear. It'll cause some pain, but it won't hurt them or cause long-term trauma. In town, I'll give people, we have some M80s, they're like a big firework. They blow up and they're really loud and they kind of have a flash. But in town too, that's a lot of times where the car alarms, the lights, yelling and stuff like that. And kind of, I always tell people, moving a bear is a last resort public safety option. And then, because I know sometimes people, it's like, well, hey, it's been around for a few days. And, and the other thing too is if there's one lingering, I'll come by and, I'll hit it with a beanbag round to get that negative connotation, or we'll use a taser on it. They really don't like that. Or even just being in the area, or I've seen them where they've come across the road and you turn the lights and the siren on the pickup and make a bunch of noise and everything else. So yeah, we kind of really, it's a last resort, not only for the welfare and coming into conflict with other people, but also for your neighbors and everybody else too.
Yeah, and another thing to add too is, in my experience, I have a bad luck with bears returning, even if we relocate them.
100%.
Yeah, so the one specific story is at San Isabel last year. We had a bear that was extremely comfortable around people, to the point where it was taking people's fish as they would reel them up on shore. And it was like, man, I got to figure it out. They bring the food to me, I grab it, and I move on. and that went on for like a week. And people got to the point where they were so frustrated, they were actually feeding the bear some of their human food, trying to keep the bear at bay. And it was a young bear, so we ended up tranquilizing the bear and moving it, and we moved it essentially down on the New Mexico border. And within 7 days, it was back at San Isabel doing the same thing. So we see this commonly with male bears. They like to come back. It does seem that younger females that haven't had cubs will relocate better. So we try to factor all that in when we're doing this. But the reality of it is oftentimes I interact with the same bear twice within a short time frame. And then once we've put that first strike on it and it comes back, now we're at 2. So it's also a downside of relocation. So
Yeah, and it's one of those things where if we can get a negative connotation of people, that car alarm going off, you yelling at it, putting out ammonia, on or near your trash can before they get into food, or if they get into it and we can secure that to where they can't get back in. Let's say they got into some chicken feed, now we've got that secured in the shed. We put out ammonia, we left the porch light on, we were driving home and we saw the animal, we laid on the car horn, stuff like that. The sooner we can get on that interaction with giving them a negative interaction with people and not getting a calorie reward, the better outcome it is for not only for you, for either property damage or, having the animal around, but also for the animal, so.
yeah. Any questions on bears?
Is there any liability for people who are continuously feeding the animals, whether intentionally or not?
There is. I'm sure we can address it now, but we see that more commonly with deer is our main thing with that, with the feeding side of it. But yes, so we do have regs in place that prevent that, or address that, I should say.
Yeah, so feeding big game in Colorado is illegal.
Regardless if you're hunting or not, or anything like that. So it's just the fact that you're placing attractants out and you're attracting big game species, that's an offense that we can write.
Yeah, and it does, those behaviors do result in conflict, typically with the individual that's engaged in that behavior, but also typically their immediate neighbors as well.
And we do have a specific bear regulation for that as well. So we have like a general big game attractant reg, and then we have one specifically for black bears too, depending on the situation, if hunting's involved or not.
Sure.
Yeah, I was kind of curious, like building on that. From my understanding, a lot of times when bears are breaking into homes, it has been like a conditioned behavior and the people are feeding them.
Yeah, they're either feeding them or they're intimately interacting with them, or they're not intervening in that behavior, and it's over a very extended period of time.
Yep.
Which then creates an unsafe environment for both
Correct.
people and the animal.
Yep. Yeah.
How about mountain lions?
Mountain lions, yeah, in terms of feeding them,
Well,
or
no.
just in general? In general, yes. I mean, they are a true carnivore, so I guess our interactions are very different because they're not going to be out looking for bird seed or things like that. So we don't have as many interactions in that regard. My common interaction is generally with livestock when I'm dealing with mountain lions. Goats, sheep, they really like goats, alpacas, llamas. I'm convinced that big neck on a llama or
Llamas
alpaca.
are designed to be eaten by mountain lions.
Yeah, lions see that big neck and they think, wow, I've hit the jackpot.
But
That's generally when I'm interacting with mountain lion calls and conflict calls. Like Spencer mentioned, I do have a lot of feral cats around Rye, Colorado City, so they do get up against the houses from time to time, and they're going after those cats. But I also have a ton of deer there, and they don't necessarily kill deer routinely in town, but on the outskirts, it happens a lot. So I'll have people call me and say, hey, like a mountain lion cached this deer on my property. And yeah, that lion will be around for a couple days and then hopefully move on. But they do love deer, so generally where there's more deer, you'll have some lions.
yeah, I think the main thing on mountain lions is sunrise, sunset with small domestic pets, avoiding just opening the door and letting them wander into the dark. You know, like if you turn the light on and make a little bit of noise, you're going to be fine there. That female's no longer around, but there's a couple mountain lions that frequent the state park. And I mean, there's people camping there 7 days a week in the summer. There's all kinds of activity, and most people have no idea that those animals are on that park. And so the interaction with them is very minimal. It's typically like feral house cats, and they're not interested in people or interacting with us, but they do like to eat house cats.
Yep, they do.
So-
And we talked about it. If you see a lion, don't run, don't turn your back to them. They always say to avoid eye contact with a mountain lion because they're a visual creature. Black bears have terrible eyesight, so most of the time, they can't make objects out from here to the back of the room. They're all dependent on smell. And a lot of times, if a bear can't smell what's in front of it, but it knows something is there, they'll stand up on their hind legs because they can smell better from that. And if people think they're being aggressive, they're going to attack, but usually they're trying to figure out what is going on.
Yeah, their noses, they're kind of
Yeah.
They're just confused.
You know.
Yeah, and a lot of times in my personal interactions, when I end up being very close to a black bear, it's because the wind is in my favor. And as soon as that bear winds me, it takes off. Because then it knows, whoa, I don't want to be around that.
Yeah.
And then with lions too, you can throw objects at lions. We recommend that if you have a close encounter. Yell at it, appear big. Like I said, don't turn your back, throw rocks, stakes at it. Make sure it knows that you are a threat to it. And that usually does work. So.
Yeah, I would say you're more likely to win the lottery or be hit by lightning or many other things than to have a
Correct.
serious interaction with the black bear or mountain lion.
I would agree.
Yeah.
Have you heard any reports by the lakes, like the reservoirs up in town in Levita? Lines?
I haven't, and I've never seen one over there, and I've never seen, like Cody mentioned, caching. So if they take a deer, they'll kind of, looks like they rake a bunch of leaves and everything else on it, and they'll eat it for a few days while it's fresh, and then they'll move along. I've never even seen that over there. There's enough human interaction over there. It's kind of like out at Lathrop too. There's bear-resistant dumpsters in the park, and the bears are never around them because there's so much human activity. I mean, they just, they're not interested.
I did see a deer leg that was severed over there.
Yeah, we see a lot of that.
Yeah, and
Not.
you'll get, what'll happen too is you'll get deer that die, or they get hit in town, and they're looking for a quiet spot,
Oh,
and then the coyotes,
Okay.
or the black bears will scavenge on them, and then, you get bits and pieces here and there and stuff like that.
Yeah, I just assumed it was cats. I wasn't sure.
Could be.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it can be domestic dogs too.
Yeah, domestic dogs are rough on deer too.
Are coyotes a problem?
Yeah, with coyotes, there's coyotes in downtown Denver. I mean, they're probably one of the few species that has expanded their historic range. I've never had any interactions with people that have had any issues other than like some livestock and stuff like
Maybe
that.
some like domestic pets too.
Yeah, you know, like
Cats, dogs.
dogs off leash,
Yeah.
you know, running on a, 30-acre property interacting, but
Yep.
yeah, for here, there's enough outside, there's no drive for them to be in town. But there's coyotes in downtown Denver. I mean, they're really adaptive, but
We do have a lot of them. I said their population kind of fluctuates, but it's usually pretty consistent.
yeah, and they're the same thing, yell at them and they'll take off. And then one of the other species people see a lot of times that I'll get calls is bobcats. And bobcats are, they're not very big.
40 pounds is a big bobcat.
Yeah, and typically they're eating mice,
Birds.
voles, birds, like we're talking stuff the size of your fist or even smaller. But sometimes you will see them around town. And there's a group of, there's like 3 or 4 foxes that I see hang around too, and they're same thing, they're typically eating really small stuff. Every once in a while chicken coops, but if you've got electricity, you're turning them in or watching them, generally not a problem. But they're opportunistic. If they think they can get a chicken and nobody's watching, they will.
And raccoons love dog food and cat food. So I see
Yeah.
that a lot. People leave it out at night and the raccoons show up and they definitely take advantage. So.
Yeah, and raccoons, skunks, all that stuff, they fall under nuisance wildlife statutes in the state of Colorado. So if you've got a raccoon or a skunk that's causing damage or causing problems on your property, typically what people do is we send them through a pest control company. Either they'll trap them or, typically the easiest way is to close off wherever they're getting in. If you've got raccoons around that are getting into something, sealing off where they're getting in usually solves that problem. And typically unsecure trash.
Do they have a way of finding their way back? I take them over the pass when I travel. And I don't know whether they come back or not.
They probably don't from that
Yeah.
distance, would be
Is
my
that right?
guess. Yeah, with raccoons, skunks, that type of thing, I don't think they're gonna work their way that far.
Yeah, and you can do like the plug-in deals that plug in that emit the high frequency, and stuff like that. Typically on those, it's securing whatever they're getting into, which is usually some kind of dog food or trash, and then the problem's gone. I always tell people, raccoons, skunks, bats, all of that stuff, they do have the potential to carry or transmit canine distemper, rabies, mange, things like that. Even if there's a dead one on your property, you want to dispose of them either with a shovel or wearing gloves. You don't want to pick one up because there is the potential for exposure to some not so good diseases.
Yeah, our general guidance is if you have to dispose of one, let's say to double bag it, if you put it in the trash, and then we're obviously protection when you're doing it.
Yeah, I get a lot of calls on bats. Don't pick up bats
Yeah,
without
don't
gloves.
pick up bats, don't touch bats.
If you have don't touch bats. If you have a bat that either got into a house or a camper or something like that, usually same thing, we send people to pest control companies for securing that. But if you do come across a bat, either you had an interaction with one or you picked one up or a grandkid or something like that, go to the hospital. I 100% guarantee, I'm not a doctor, but I've never heard of someone interacting with a bat and not having the rabies rounds of shots. And I think that bats are probably something that rabies maybe doesn't come to mind, but yeah,
Even if you don't get bitten?
even if you don't get bitten, even if you're just handling them, yeah, you're probably, I always tell people if they call me and say, hey, I picked up this bat, or usually my dog picked up this bat, or my kid or my grandkid picked up this bat, usually the first thing I say was, were you wearing a mask and were you wearing gloves? And if the answer is no, I tell them, all testing for rabies is done through the county health department, so the Los Angeles-Huerfano County Health Department. So I say, bag up that animal, call the health department, but either go to the emergency room or call your doctor because you want to get those shots. I think now the guidelines is 48 hours from exposure. And from experience, I will tell you, if you call the doctor or you go to the ER and you say you have handled the bat, or even it was, say you woke up and there was one flying around in the room, they are unequivocally going to tell you that they want you to get the rabies vaccine shots. I think it's 3 shots now. Yeah.
So you've gotten them?
I did.
I was wondering
It's
if,
been a
like,
while ago.
I didn't know if, like, you just working the CPW, if you just automatically have to get them.
They
I thought
do.
usually, yeah.
Yeah, and like baby raccoons and stuff too. I'll tell people, generally like I've had where a tree gets cut down or something happens, and they'll say, hey, we saw these, infant or orphan or small or baby raccoons. I always tell people, just leave them be. Typically, once the sun goes down, mom's coming back, she's grabbing them and off to a new safe spot. But I've had people where they're holding a raccoon and I don't touch them without gloves, and I 100% don't.
Then you
Reckon.
throw your gloves away?
Oh yeah.
You put them in the laundry with your other clothes.
Yeah, it's one of those things, bats, skunks, raccoons, whether they're dead or alive, don't touch them without gloves. Otherwise, you're probably you're gonna get to experience the rabies shots, and everyone that I've talked to has said it's been an unpleasant experience. It doesn't hurt, I think, that much, but it's just, you gotta go through it. It's 3 shots, and just kind of, because there is no cure for that. So.
You get any calls from people getting tick bites, a bunch of that stuff?
Me personally, no.
No, we're so dry here that, we don't run into a lot of tick issues. Kind of one of the other things I wanted to talk about today too, which is probably one of the #1 calls I get out of Levita is deer. I think there's a lot of folks that have really good intentions, and their intention is not to cause harm to these animals, but feeding deer, not only is it unlawful in the state of Colorado, it results in a bunch of problems. Typically, the #1 thing is acidosis. So deer are not designed or built to be running off of bread, some of the milo and millet that it gets mixed in with bird feeders, or other types of human food that people put out. So typically what will happen is if you get a deer that's taking in a large amount of those substances that aren't natural to them, it'll change the acidic level in their digestive tract, and they'll get ulcers and internal bleeding, just like we could from a number of different reasons. And you'll actually get internal bleeding and blockage. And if you see a deer and it looks like it has diarrhea all down the backside of it, and they're really, really thin, typically it's one that has been eating something that it's not supposed to, that's not a natural food source. So long term, it causes internal bleeding, trauma, digestive problems, and it ultimately leads to a very slow, miserable, horrible, horrendous death. And usually when I talk to folks that are feeding deer, I think I'm helping. They're not doing it maliciously or anything else, but I always do try to spread the word that feeding deer does kill them. It's either slowly through that, or it habituates them to people. I had an instance where a lady got gored by a small buck, and sent her to the hospital, and she was in the hospital I think for 3 days, and she had some other stuff that was going on, but it was not a good day. And then that animal ultimately had to be euthanized as well. So, and a lot of it is, we do get some intentional feeding where people, they're putting out bread or, like leftover stale items, thinking, hey, it's gonna help wildlife. I always tell people, unfortunately, it's not. But a lot of our feeding too is also, I call it unintentional. It's the, I spilled some of my bird feed, or the squirrels were shaking the bird feeder, and now on the ground is a bunch of milo, millet, corn, things of that nature, and that'll cause unintentional bird feed or deer feeding too. So from a standpoint of they're not built to run on it, and it changes and it causes internal problems and a lot of times ultimately death, to it can put you in a situation where, you know, you can get hurt, or like a doe with fawns, or if they adopt an orphan fawn, it can be kind of aggressive that time of year. It puts them in close contact with people and dogs. And then the other thing too is it creates a concentration point where then we can have the vector and spread of things like chronic wasting disease and other things like that. So generally on deer, what I always tell people is there's kind of I tell people, not only is it unlawful to feed them, it negatively impacts them. Make sure the base of bird feeders, especially pellet bird feeders, are cleaned up and contained. Make sure, you're not, if you're composting or putting out, food waste scraps, you're doing that in a contained area. We always advocate for people to keep dogs on leashes. Deer view dogs as predators, and they will rear up and they'll start flailing those front legs, and they will stomp and kill a dog or severely injure a dog. And then if they get to the point where they get habitually fed by people where they're trying to view you or your home or humans as a food source, and they're now approaching you, they're still a wild animal. You never know what they're going to do, and then we get into the conflict where then people can get knocked down or things like that. One of the other calls I get a lot on deer is injured deer, and generally what I tell people is a lot of times the general scenario is someone's driving down the road too fast, which they slow down and they'll hit a deer, and that deer will wander off. Well, if it's got a broken leg and it's to the point where that bone is sticking through and it's visible, I've never had an experience where they're not going to succumb to an infection or predation or some kind of prolonged or starvation or something. So typically, if it's an injured deer where it's got the bone is actually protruding through the skin and is visible, we'll euthanize it to where those animals aren't suffering. If it's a deer that is still up, or it's a deer that can't get up, it doesn't look like, there's a bone sticking out or anything like that. Maybe it doesn't look like anything, but, it can't get up. It's trying to get up. It's tried to get up for a long time. I walked by it on my sidewalk to get to my car. It's either falling back down or it's not able to get up. Typically, those animals are usually to a point where they're, either from a car impact trauma or from a disease standpoint. Usually they're to the point where there's not a lot of intervention we can do, and they're gonna succumb to those injuries. So to avoid that prolonged suffering, we will euthanize them. But I will say on a deer that is upright, mobile, and is able to move away from a threat. So if I pull up and I step out of my pickup and I'm looking at this deer and it's got a leg and it's limping or it's dragging it a little bit, and I walk towards it and that deer is moving away from me because it views me as a threat, or it's able to get up and it runs off or it hops over a fence, a lot of times they don't look great. It's not the easiest to see or deal with. But I do have deer in Walsenburg that, you can tell they've got a limp and stuff like that, but I've got a doe that's, I'd say 3 years, like she's been limping around Walsenburg, and she's, she can feed, she can get water, like we're not gonna destroy that animal because she's not suffering and she's able to recover. So typically what I tell people is if there's visible bones, if they can't get up, 100% call us. Usually we're going to euthanize that animal to prevent ongoing suffering. If that animal can get up and it can move away from us or move away from you, usually we leave them be, and that's the best chance that they have. It's not always to say that they're not going to get predated on by, a mountain lion or a black bear, or they're not going to, maybe go off and succumb to those injuries too. But us trying to capture or, physically intervene is going to result in more injuries or, a worse likelihood of an outcome. trying to think, entrapments, other stuff, like stuff tangled in antlers.
Yeah, I mean, another thing to add too is we don't have rehab options for adult deer. Despite what some people think, I say I don't have a place that I can take a deer if it has an injury. I say they either have to basically fix themselves with time, or we're gonna have to euthanize them. But I agree with what Spencer said. There's a lot of deer running around that are very resilient, and you know they may have 3 legs and they're living a good life. I'm very picky on when I am called to play Mother Nature, because a lot of times I don't really think it's best for the animal. I think it's best for the people that don't want to look at it anymore. So I try to be very careful on that end. And I think Spencer and I are on the same boat, where the last thing we like to do is put animals down. I say it's not our favorite thing. At times we have to, and it is in the best interest of the animal, but we're pretty careful about when we do that, just because we don't like to do it. So,
Yeah, entrapments, I had up at the cemetery here, this was probably 6 months ago, I got a call from a lady and her husband, and this deer, I think they had some ropes that were blocking off some of the roadways, and he had caught his antlers, and he was attached to the T-post. So he was, you know, entangled and entrapped, and in situations like that, we always, yes, 100% call us. So on that one, I've got enough weight that I walked out on the line to where I got as close to his head as I could, and waited for him to kind of exhaust himself a little bit, and then I took my shovel and I cut that line. I got calls probably every day for 2 weeks after that. You know, hey, there's a buck running around La Vida, and he's got a rope in his antlers and stuff like that. So, you know, that's another thing. Christmas lights, you know, clotheslines, stuff like that. If you're decorating for, I'd say Halloween and Christmas are probably the 2 main ones.
yeah,
You
especially
know,
Christmas.
Try to think, you know, hey, is the deer been through here? Or, you know, if I was a deer, would I be trying to, you know, eat this or that? If they have stuff in their antlers, because they do drop their antlers every single year, it doesn't look great, but typically we're not going to intervene, because us intervening, either trying to drug the animal or physically restrain the animal or chase the animal, is going to result in more trauma and negative impacts to the animal than that debris is. So like on that guy, he was a little 2x2 here in La Vida. He ran around for a couple of months with, it looked like a big ball on
It was
his.
green, right?
Yes, it was
Yeah,
green.
I was
Yes.
like, I saw this.
Yes, and there, I got it cut to where it was clear up, and then he got a little bit to where it was still dragging. It was like kind of hanging down off of him. And I told everyone, I said, yes, there is the potential that he could get re-entrapped in a fence or, you know, some other items, but he is still up and mobile. If he does become re-entangled, we will, like, call me, and I will gladly come out. And, you know, like, if I can cut him out again, I'll cut him out. Sometimes we can use a taser to put them under the taser, and it kind of locks them up to where then you can cut them out and everything.
That's what I was just wondering, because I'm like, wouldn't you have to like sedate them and
Yeah,
stuff
we either
to
have
be able get it
to
off?
drug and sedate them, or,
Right.
Well, the other issue too
Yeah.
is generally, like, deer will exhaust themselves when they get tangled up.
Uh-huh.
So a lot of times if you're gonna use tranquilizer drug on them at that time, there's a higher risk that you'll kill them,
yeah.
because that adrenaline is already high.
Right,
So a lot of times it's not the best idea, but
Yeah.
sometimes we have to.
yeah.
I've dealt with a lot where they got tangled, they got free, but they have obstacles on their antlers or their head. And at that point, I'm a little more comfortable tranking them, because they've calmed down and that's just their daily life at the moment. I've removed bird feeders, sourdough pretzel tubs,
Top of
line,
a galvanized chain link
yeah,
post.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Spencer helped me with that one. So the other thing too is like tomato cages, plant cages. I've had to remove a lot of those off of deer, because they're going to go for those plants and get that food, and then suddenly they're stuck. And the downside is a lot of times they're still growing, so they grow into the wire, and then it gets nasty. So I tell people, like, yeah, pay attention to that. Try hard, because they love tomato cages.
Yeah. But typically, if they're up and mobile, we leave them be. If they're to the point that they can't get up, unfortunately, the outcome is what it is, and instead of slowly suffering to that outcome, we'll euthanize them. Or like anything where there's bone sticking through, infection and things like that. But otherwise, if they're up and mobile, usually we leave them be. Sometimes it works out great for them, other times they deteriorate to a point where then they don't become mobile. And then as far as entrapments or entanglements, usually if we can cut them out, we can cut them out. Like on that buck that had all that green rope around his head, he, dropped his head and kind of was coming at me a little bit, and I couldn't really get any more off of him without either hurting myself or hurting him. So now he dropped his antlers, and I still see him every once in a while because he's kind of got some distinct characteristics, and he has some funky antlers that he regrew.
He gets away from you, I bet.
Yeah, it's hard because they don't understand you're there to try to help them.
Correct.
I mean, if you can think about it, you're stuck, and then this predator shows up, and what do predators do? They eat stuff. So, that deer's assumption is probably there that I'm there to eat it, and I'm obviously not, but he doesn't know that.
So we're gonna need to leave, but thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
Yeah, and I think at this,
more people had come.
yeah, at this point, we'll just kind of, if anybody wants to come up, we've got a bunch of handouts about, different things to reduce conflicts with bears, mountain lions, deer, and then also just some different color variations of bears that you'll see in the area, and then just the different, these are replica skulls that kind of show the size and, what these animals are,
And then,
are built.
The only thing I wanted to cover that we didn't talk about was fawns.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
And how to handle fawns, because that's a common thing in town. People are gonna find fawns, and they're gonna think they're abandoned, and they're gonna wanna touch them. And I tell people, do not touch fawns. So that when they're born without any scent, and as soon as humans touch them, a lot of times the moms will reject them, and they won't take them back in. A mom can actually leave a fawn up to a day by itself, and it's fine, it will survive. They generally stash them in places where there's shade, they're safe, and that's generally when people find them and they call us and they say, hey, I picked up this fawn, what do I do? And I'm like, oh no. I'm like, please put it back.
Take back time, go back.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, once again, we don't have a lot of rehab options. Occasionally we would have one for fawns, but in my experience, it's been very rare. So the best thing you can do is place that fawn exactly where you found it and let it be, and mom will come back. And mom has to go out and forage and get food so she can feed the fawn. So she'll leave them where it's safe and then go risk her life just roaming around and come back. So my general rule is if somebody calls me about that, I tell them, hey, let it be, and then call me in the morning if it's still there. Because usually mom's gonna come back in the evening or at night and they're gonna move. But until that point, let them be, and if we need to, we'll intervene, but that's never a very fun day for us when we have to intervene with the fawns.
Yeah, and typically it's hey, I went to work at, 8 this morning, or I, went outside and, I came back from running errands, or, the store, or, I came back to eat lunch, on my break, and this fawn's still here. And that's where it really comes in, where we say, yeah, 3, 6, 8, 10, 12 hours, typically, like Cody said, it's in a cool, shaded spot. And mom, what I always tell people is, if the animal's there the next morning and it has not moved, it's in the same spot, and you haven't seen the doe, there might be something going on. Mom got hit, the doe got hit by a car, she abandoned that fawn for whatever reason. There could be something where, yeah, we do intervene, but typically it's usually, it's kind of that, do they really leave them for that long? And the answer is yes. They will leave them for half a day, 3/4 of a day, or a full day. And usually it's in someone's backyard because they can get in, there's a shaded spot, it's grassy, and they view it as safe, and it's a comfortable spot for that doe to leave that fawn, go out, get water, rest. They'll even just, lay down and rest away from them, eat. And so if it's there, the next morning rolls around and there's still no movement, anything like that, that's probably maybe something's going wrong. And we'll intervene, but outside of that, I always tell people, please don't touch it, leave it where it is, make sure your dogs are secured or on a leash.
Yep, and a lot of times people will be like, well, I put water out and all that, and please avoid feeding the fawn. I say they're dependent on mom at that point, so it's really not the best idea anyway.
Do they even drink water
No.
at that point?
No, they don't.
Okay.
No, they don't.
Yeah.
But, generally I'm just like, no, like just stay away from the fawn, let it be. And they'll cry. I mean, it happens. They'll sit there and cry for mom, and people think that like, hey, like mom's dead, mom's gone, but a lot of times that's just what they do.
I'm also just like, do you not have pets? Like my cat cries.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, I mean,
she's just hungry, she
it
just wants
happens
food.
with fawns,
Yeah.
they'll cry. And for me, when I go look at a fawn in a situation where there's concern over the mom's well-being, I'm generally looking at the ears on the fawn because that's how I tell if there's potential risk of dehydration. It shows in the ears first. So I can usually look at the, yeah, they'll get like almost like papery and they'll kind of like wrinkly. And if I see that, then yeah, there might be concern. But like I said, usually I'm gonna let it be, and if it's still there in the morning, then yeah, I'll probably take a harder look and maybe do something. But once again, our options are kind of limited, so then you're making the judgment call of, is this in the best interest for the animal?
You mean you did bring milk bottle?
No, and, yeah, no, and don't get me wrong, I say we have a lot of people that decide that's the solution, and then take them home and do that.
Well, the other thing too is generally when they're a little bit bigger fawns and they still have some spots, like I've seen where a doe gets hit by a car or something like that, and then you see one doe that used to have twins that now has 3, so sometimes the other does will pick them up.
Yep.
So,
It can happen. So the main thing, keep scent away.
yeah. The takeaway is if you see a fawn on the ground and mom's not around, generally she's off resting, drinking, eating, or there was a dog or something else in the area and she's trying to deal with that. If they're there the next day and nothing's changed, that's when the potential where something wrong happened. I know it's one of those where it's like, it's been 5 hours, and it's like, yeah, and then typically I'll tell people, hey, can you please, call, and usually right around sunset is when they call and say, hey, mom, the doe's back,
Yeah.
Yeah.
The deer are smart, they'll do that. I say if they see dogs, coyotes, other things, they're like, I'm gonna lure that out of here.
Right.
So my baby's safe and I'm gonna leave it where it's safe in the grass or wherever.
Yeah,
And they're pretty smart.
and sometimes they can be really hard to find. Like I got a call in Walsenburg that the guy said, I don't know why this doe is really hanging around, and like I let my dog out and she's being really aggressive, and I walked around for half an hour before I about stepped on the fawn and tucked real small, just recent birth born in the corner. So yeah, they know how to take care of them.
Yep.
But yeah, if you guys want to get up, if you want to look at any of the skulls, the hides, if you want any of the handouts to take, anything like that, if you've got any questions, or specific things you want to ask, we just appreciate everybody coming. So
Yeah, so I don't know who actually did the text.
the less conflict with wildlife,
So
the
that
better
one's fair.
for people
See, this
and
one's
the
a
wildlife.
Yeah,
This is a
I'm
kite
curious,
tail, it's a bobcat. Yeah.
What animal
It's kind of neat to see
has
the
those
difference
horns?
between the lion and bobcat.
Bears.
Very
Is it bears?
similar. just
Yeah,
a lot
and
smaller.
it's not conflict in the sense of like interacting with the animal. It's
Yeah.
I woke up and my trash is all over the place,
Oh, gotcha.
or
They broke my
they
camera.
got into my chicken coop,
Yeah.
or
Yeah, it's
like-
always entertaining
I
to
think
see how
it's
long
honestly
their
deer.
tail is.
yeah, in here too.
Kind of fast.